Welcome back. We're joined by Bill Walton, friend and colleague of now many years. He has been very influential on Wall Street. He's now very influential through his television podcast, The Bill Walton Show. And Bill, one of the things that I think really requires some close scrutiny at the moment is the way in which economic warfare is actually being pursued at the moment, not just by the Chinese Communist Party, of course, but now by NATO and the United States. Joe Biden is headed off to Europe to talk about this and more, I'm sure, with our NATO allies this week. Give us a flavor of, first of all, what are the various sanctions that have been imposed in response to Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine doing to the Russian economy, to its currency, and potentially to how the world's economic system operates.
Well, it's had the economic sanctions by the EU in particular have been a real crushing blow on most of the China or most of the Russian economy. They've after the entrance after their last invasion of a small country, Crimea in 2014, Putin announced an import. I think it was I can't remember his title for it, but they were going to become less import dependent. Uh, and that just has not succeeded. The growth industries in Russia have been technology related industries, and 90% of what they do in technology relies on imports of subcomponents from the rest of the world. And so we've got this lopsided economy now where oil and gas, fossil fuels, natural gas, the production's fallen off, but most people are still buying oil and natural gas from Russia, notwithstanding the sanctions. The rest of the country, though, is really problematic. You can't even get pet food in Russia. And the question for Putin is how long will the Russian people put up with this? It's already, since 2014, GDP per person has fallen almost 10%, while the rest of Europe has grown by about 10%. So they're
Wow.
declining rapidly in relation to other European countries. And it's beginning to create some unrest. Whether that puts pressure on Putin to wrap this up quickly remains to be seen.
Uh, Bill, to the extent that we have seen people continuing to buy Russian energy, it's particularly noteworthy that the Indians have done a deal with Putin that not only will involve large amounts of natural gas, I believe, and oil coming from Russia to India in violation of the sanctions, but also that the deal's denominated in rupees. The Russians are taking rupees instead of petrodollars, as they're
What's
called.
happening? What's
Um,
happening to what's
Talk about
what
that, would you? And also about Saudi Arabia and what they're doing with the Chinese of a
Frank?
similar
What's
character.
happening to the Russian economy is a sideshow. I mean, it's already per capita they rank 68 in the world now, and they've been suffering for a long time. The headline here is that what the Biden administration has done with its desire to shut down the fossil fuel industry in the United States has led to Putin feeling aggressive about going into Ukraine, but it's also making countries all over the world decide, well, maybe they don't want to rely on the dollar, the petrodollar, to buy their oil with. And as you mentioned, China is already talking with Saudi Arabia about buying its oil in yuan. Now, that's about 6 million barrels, and China imports about, I think, 25% of their oil from Saudi Arabia already. I may have that number
Mm.
jarbled a bit. I can come back to you on it, but it's a lot. And if they switch to yuan as opposed to dollars, that's a big change. With India buying oil from Russia in rupees, that's another change. And what's happening, people, even African countries are thinking, well, maybe we need to create a currency block to buy our oil in something other than dollars. India, Pakistan, Russia have already, I'm sorry, it's India, Russia, and China have already been talking about a currency block to trade oil in. And So the big risk here is that the United States could lose its status as the dollar could lose its status as the world's reserve currency. And if that
Yeah.
happens, our $30 trillion in deficits, our $2 or $3 trillion annual deficits, all that becomes much, much more problematic because it's unclear how we would finance it. So
Yeah.
these people are tempting the fates here with all this climate insanity that's not only making us dependent on the world for our oil and gas, or at least some of it, but the reserve currency for me is the very, very big issue here. And it's unclear how this is going to unfold. Unfortunately, I don't see a lot of grown-ups in the Biden administration or wise people, including Janet Yellen or Jay Powell, who seem to be capable of doing much about it.
Well, first of all, they're not doing anything about the climate change agenda other than
Support it.
intensifying it. Of course, that's the policy of the Biden administration. But to your larger point, Bill, they seem to be so sanguine about the immutability of the dollar as the reserve currency of the world that they can't be bothered stopping, for example, the printing presses from continuing to generate more and more dollars worth less and less, which I think is at the heart of this problem. As is, of course, sort of responses to the SWIFT decision and other economic sanctions that rely heavily on the dollar's preeminence. So, Bill, do you see an alternative? You mentioned regional arrangements, but is there really emerging now a workable alternative to the dollar, do you think? And if so, wouldn't that catalyze very quickly this kind of replacement?
Not yet. 80% of the world's oil trades in dollars. So there's a big delta to go from dollars to something else. What we could be seeing happening, though, is instead of globalization, we could be seeing regionalization. China's already looking inward to look for finance inside China as opposed to going outside the world for its investment dollars. And we're seeing that with Xi's crackdown on the technology companies. Uh, and Russia's already talked about not being dependent on imports for its economy, and they're basically saying, well, look, we'd rather have a smaller, more primitive economy than trade in the world where we're dependent upon all these other countries for essentials. A lot of countries are beginning to think like that. And so this is a tectonic shift. I don't see it. This is not like the dollar is going to be replaced next week, but countries around the world are looking at the United States, and they're looking at the ham-handed way that we got out of Afghanistan, the arbitrary way we've shut down our own fossil fuel industry. They're looking at leadership here, and they're saying we can't trust them, and therefore we've got to look for our own sorts of finance, our own relationships, all sorts of bilateral arrangements with countries that they feel they can do business with, and trying to leave America out of the equation. That's a big problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Most especially people who are betting with your money without really your knowledge or desire for them to be doing so. Bill, there's so much more to talk with you about. As always, we run out of time before we run out of topics, but it's always delightful to have a chance to visit with you, even if occasionally the tidings are not entirely happy. Thank you for the work you do at the Bill Walton Show, and of course for your visits here with us each week. We appreciate them greatly, and we look forward to catching up with you again next week. Next up, we're going to speak with another of our regulars, Reggie Littlejohn, and she's going to give us an update on this phenomenon of digital health cards. Is this a way of introducing the Chinese social credit system here in America? What would that mean for you? That and more straight ahead.
Real America's Voice presents Water Cooler with David Brody.
How do you have them keep the faith through these tough times?
I tell them to stay tuned.
Now, what does that mean? I have to ask you a
Water
follow-up on
Cooler,
that, Mr.
weekdays at 3 p.m. Eastern.